Hello, everyone. Good evening, and welcome back to our daily live stream. Thank you for everyone who's been waiting and anyone joining us. Excellent. Looks like everything is okay. Cool. Thank you for joining me, everyone, and welcome back to our daily live stream. For everyone joining for the first time, I do these live streams regularly, aside from my regular videos, to open the space up for all of the viewers, subscribers, and members to share their thoughts and also ask questions. I posted a video earlier on about the expected meeting in Russia between the Russian authorities, Hamas, the PIJ, and the PLO. So you can head and watch that after this live stream. I also gave a couple of updates about Gaza. Obviously, feel free to ask any questions regarding these things after I finish with the initial introduction presentation about tonight's topic, and which leads me to tonight's topic, really. I wanted to talk about Netanyahu. So Israel has been talking a lot about the day after in Gaza. Before I get into what Netanyahu said, I just want to highlight here the talk about the day after in Gaza, and people should understand that they use these things to psychologically prepare people and manipulate them to anticipate. It's as if we were talking about it's done, right? So they want to put it in your head that we're done with Gaza already. So we need to talk about the day after. It's a given that we're gonna, beat the Palestinian resistance. And it's also very condescending and humiliating on purpose, as if to say that the people of Gaza and the Palestinian people are unable to govern themselves properly on their own, and we need to decide on their behalf. It's this neo-colonial approach that Israel has, obviously, backed by colonial powers. And I spoke about previously, and I reiterate before I go into what Netanyahu spoke about, what he said, and obviously analyzing what he said, the day after that we should be talking about is the day after Israel, the day after apartheid, the day after supremacy, the day after religious and racial supremacy, oppression, and occupation. This is the day after that we should be talking about. And I repeat, as I stated previously, Hamas and the resistance, the act of resistance, in particular when we're talking about the Palestinian resistance, is a symptom to a virus called Zionism. It's an antidote to this virus. When you get rid of this virus, you don't have resistance. People don't resist out of their will just to resist. You have reasons for people to resist. It's important, it's very important to highlight that. Which leads me to Benjamin Netanyahu. So he just revealed his plan. He's finally revealing his plan for the day after in Gaza. This plan includes, number one, Israel having full military and security control. He previously stated that Israel must have full security control to the east of the Jordan River. That's the West Bank, Israel, and Gaza now. Second thing he spoke about is having forces that are not supported by terrorist countries, nor support terrorists themselves. He means by that Hamas, which is supported by Iran, by Qatar, by other countries too. And obviously they describe Iran as a terrorist country. And he also has a reference to Fatah, the PLO led by Mahmoud Abbas in the West Bank because they support casualties and families of martyrs who were assassinated and killed by Israel that Israel labels as terrorists. This is in line with what Netanyahu previously stated, that we will not have a Hamasistan next to us or a Fatahstan. We won't have a terrorist state, in his words, next to us. The third thing he spoke about is demilitarizing Gaza, complete demilitarization beyond what is required for the needs of maintaining public order. Again, this resonates with what he spoke about previously, that they want to completely disarm Gaza. The fourth thing that he spoke about is establishing a security buffer zone. Israel had a security buffer zone before the war with Gaza in 2014, following which Hamas forced Israel to delete that buffer zone, and they were very close to Israeli territories. Now he's talking about 1 to 1.6 kilometers buffer zone between Israel and Gaza, and obviously that will eat up into Gaza territory, similarly to what they did with the wall in the West Bank. All of the wall was built inside of 1967 territories, in many cases splitting neighborhoods, splitting families. So imagine, just a bit of a brief here, imagine you're living in a neighborhood. You have your neighbors, you've been living next to them for 100 years or so. Israel comes and builds a wall between you, regardless of who's living there. And mostly with Palestinian communities, families live next to each other. So they built walls, 10-meter walls between families all across the West Bank. And obviously many people forget that, and they also don't talk about it. But this is what Israel does. The fifth thing, ladies and gentlemen, that Netanyahu said that he wants to achieve in Gaza about the day after in Gaza is de-radicalizing Gaza. They need to have a process of de-radicalization. And his plan for de-radicalization includes religious, educational, and welfare institutions in Gaza. They need to be de-radicalized. And obviously, some of these things were in line with what he stated previously, but now he is publishing this as a plan, obviously with the talks about potential unity government or a technocratic government as proposed by some countries, which I personally obviously find absurd for anyone to try and impose something on the people. But hey, the Palestinians have been living under this dictatorship, this authoritarianism, globally, really, for the past 75 years. Another interesting thing that Benjamin Netanyahu said is that there will be as much as possible, involvement and assistance of Arab countries that have experience in promoting de-radicalization. So he wants some Arab countries to support in the de-radicalization in Gaza. These are the main things that I want to talk about in terms of Netanyahu, and I'm going to obviously open up the space for you to participate. I'm sure many of you will have a lot to say about Netanyahu's plan for the day after in Gaza, especially with the de-radicalization. I'd be interested to know what you have to say, and obviously share it and answer any questions. But before I get to your input and your questions, which you can start obviously posting, and I'm going to get to them in a second, a quick update that I haven't posted in my video earlier on this evening about what's happening in Paris. So Israel sent a delegation to Paris. So they're negotiating with Hamas indirectly in many capitals, but now it's in Paris. Israeli media is reporting, and obviously Hamas officials are declaring, that Hamas is not backing down on several points that they said they will not back down on. Number one, Israel withdrawing from all of Gaza, Number two, rebuilding Gaza. These are the main things that they were speaking about. Obviously, alongside their other points, but these were the highlighted points, and the other points would obviously be a complete and total ceasefire. So it would be interesting to see where things go from here, because to this moment we're seeing Benjamin Netanyahu very stubborn when it comes to the negotiations, and it doesn't seem like Israel is going anywhere near what Hamas are demanding. And people were thinking that there is a potential input from Benny Gantz and from the war cabinet when it comes to this, because some officials from Arab countries and other states were speaking with Benny Gantz directly, who is a member of the war cabinet in Israel, but that same person is now speaking in the same tone that Netanyahu is speaking in, a continuation of the war, deeper into this genocide, and it doesn't look like we're gonna reach a solution anytime soon. Some people are putting pressure, international countries obviously, to try and reach a ceasefire before the holy month of Ramadan. It doesn't look like Israel's playing ball. As a matter of fact, they're actually in quite a sadistic way, which is very typical and normal for Israel. They are actually teasing the Palestinians. They're telling them, "Oh, you're not gonna have a tough, you're not gonna have a good Ramadan." As a matter of fact, Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister, I spoke about him a couple of days ago. He said it's gonna be a difficult Ramadan in the West Bank. No salaries, no work, no nothing. Now, Benny Gantz is saying, if the people in Gaza want to have a peaceful Ramadan, then they need to bring back the Israeli prisoners. So it doesn't seem like there is any progress when it comes to the ceasefire. And obviously, I'll finish my introduction here and open the space for you to start sharing your thoughts. Before I begin, thank you very much for Stephen Hayes, Daniela Modus Cutter, and Auntie Kay, and Joseph Roy, Chocolate Pudding, and Stephen Hayes again. Thank you so much, and thanks for everyone who's joining me, all of the members, the subscribers, the moderators, and all of the viewers. Thank you very much. I'm going to start off with the first question we had here. And again, excuse me if I'm unable to address all of your comments and messages. We're going to try and highlight the main ones. There is a question from Gigi saying they could have taken the women and children out of Gaza temporarily to avoid humanity trauma. And many people have been saying that. Why do they not let the people who are uninvolved in this war and this genocide, really, but in terms of the Palestinians, like not fighting with the resistance, let them leave Gaza? Because there's, in my opinion, and obviously regardless of how right or wrong it is, in my opinion, that's not being done simply because it would fall under to Egypt, if you want to take it as an example, because it would be expected that Egypt lets them in. It would fall under the Israeli attempt and desire to expel the Palestinians, and unfortunately there are international countries that are involved in these malicious criminal attempts of Israel. So obviously there is no guarantee that they would go back, and secondly, we're talking about hundreds of thousands, if not over 1 million people, obviously, because the majority of the Gazan population is, but many of them are under 18. But it's one of those very unfortunate situations, and that doesn't obviously stop Israel from still targeting them. As a matter of fact, they deliberately targeted them since the beginning of this war. I mean, in the last 24 hours, we've had over 140 civilians killed by Israel. massacre after massacre. So far, we have over 12,500 children and over 8,000 women killed. Israel targets them deliberately since the beginning of this genocide. Let's go to the following question or comment. Israfil is saying Israel economy contracting, investment down by 68%, import declined by 42%, export dropped by 18%, failing productions, crashing property prices, rising food costs, and citizens leaving in droves. The general tone of this comment is very, very accurate. To be fair, I'm not entirely sure about the exact percentages, but constant feedback from Israel shows that this is exactly the case. The situation economically is awful, socially is awful, politically is awful, security awful, and people are indeed leaving in droves. And obviously greetings to everyone joining us and sending greeting messages. Blanks, they're saying Israel, USA should have nothing to say about Palestine. Palestine should rule themselves and not answer to anyone. Sovereign Palestine free to lead and protect themselves however they decide. This is exactly how it should be, and this is exactly what these people are fighting. Sovereignty, independence, liberty, freedom, and justice. Because to them, these things, only few people are entitled for them. Certain people are. Other people are not entitled to these liberties that they supposedly promote. I mean, we constantly hear about democracy and the implementation of democracy, democratic practices, right? And in many cases, you'll hear them criticizing the Arab world for the lack of democracy. And obviously, we criticize many Arab countries and Muslim countries for lack of democracy. However, the truth becomes apparent when you have a democracy, but that democracy brings people that they don't like. And usually you're talking about people who call for independence, sovereignty, you know, all of these things, regardless of their background, by the way. So some people obviously claim that there's a specific battle against like Muslim-based or Islamic ideology-based organizations, which is true to an extent. However, that's not the whole picture, really. We've had in recent history many cases, and not just in the Middle East, globally, of many movements that were not religious movements. You can have secular movements, leftist movements, or national movements that were fought heavily by the US and some Western powers. I mean, and I constantly speak about Latin America, that the United States administration regards as its backyard. This is how they call it. Lots of these movements there were like leftist movements. Now, I personally, like myself, I couldn't care less about left or right, because to me it's about the values, the principles that you promote, regardless of where they're coming from. But whenever you had a movement of independence, calling for freedoms, calling for democracy, that the actual people vote for in these countries, they are constantly fought against, they're constantly taking down, military coups, sometimes through criminal organizations. And it's very evident for anyone who's seen and read about like recent history when it comes to all across the 20th century, really, in many parts of the world, and not just Palestine. The highlight with Palestine is you have a case of the final colonial state project. Israel is a colonial state that belongs to these powers, you know what I mean? Whereas in other locations, they use their internal division and groups that are aligned with them in terms of geopolitical and economic interests. So that's very spot on. Taylor is saying the same thing. That's a joke. Netanyahu doesn't have the right or moral or political authority to tell Gaza how they should be governed. Absolutely. And I mean, I've had people previously ask me, what do you think? Who do you think? Do you think Hamas should run Gaza? And to that, I would always answer is they choose who they want. If they want Hamas in a democratic election and they chose Hamas in a democratic election, then that's their right. We don't know better than them, even as Palestinians. We haven't lived in Gaza. I'm not entitled to speak on their behalf. No one is entitled to speak on their behalf, similar to how no one is entitled to speak on behalf of the Palestinian refugees. When people talk about a two-state solution and there is no right for these refugees to return to their homelands inside of what is now called Israel, no one has a right to say that. It's the people who have been deprived from these liberties, from these rights, who should have the ultimate say when it comes to their rights and their destiny. Chocolate Pudding is saying, Zaim, does Hizb have anti-air defense S-300, S-400? Also, why are they so restrained and only targeting the north, Kiryat and Shib'a, etc.? Very good question. They don't have these advanced air defense system. The only air defense system that we heard reports about them getting potentially from a group that replaced the Wagner group from Russia is an air defense system that I'm not entirely sure what's called, to be honest with you. I forgot the name, but it's a battery basically of air defense missiles that can be moved on a truck. However, there has been no confirmation of them receiving it. I'm not sure if Syria can lend them the SA, for example, if Israel would attack deeper. That's when it comes to their air defense systems. When it comes to why they're so restrained in targeting the north and the northern settlements in Israel, that's a very good question. It's because, number one, if you recall Nasrallah's speech after the first speech after the 7th of October attacks, he had a speech about 30 days later, because Hezbollah started participating on the 8th of October with limited back and forth attacks against Israel. When he spoke in that speech, he said that we had no prior knowledge about this attack. It was very secretive, and that's why it was so successful, according to him. However, when it came to light, we had to obviously support the Palestinian people. When it comes to why it's so limited, obviously the lack of prior knowledge and preparation as and when for the battle itself. Not that they're not prepared, they are always prepared for another war with Israel. But it's limited because they don't want to drag an all-out war on Lebanon. Many people in Lebanon in the beginning who oppose Hezbollah, because not all of Lebanon is supporting Hezbollah, we have nothing to do with it. Israel is fighting Gaza. Don't drag us into another war. We're in a tough economic situation. So they have their national responsibilities as the power in Lebanon. When you talk about armed power, they're obviously way more powerful than the Lebanese army. But at the same time, they couldn't leave the Palestinians suffer, and they obviously try to exhaust the Israeli military as much as possible to take away from their genocidal barbarism against Gaza, which they did. They're exhausting approximately 30% in total of the Israeli forces' power. But there are like underlying understanding, so to speak, between Israel and Hezbollah, Not that they have like a written agreement or whatever, but when it comes to the attacks, if you go deeper, we'll go deeper. If you escalate, we escalate. We saw what happened when they targeted Saleh al-Aruri, for example. They intensified, they attacked the Northern Air Command Base in Jabal al-Jamraq in Arabic, or Har Miron in Hebrew. And they also targeted the IDF command in Tzfat in northern Israel. So they're trying to play a very, very sensitive and tough game here of balancing between supporting Gaza, showing solidarity, actual solidarity, not just to words, but by actions, but not drag it to an all-out war. They have very many calculations. And Joseph Roy saying, Ben and Joe gotta go. Okay, let's go to the next. Blue Anon, did they capture Sinwar? No, they have no proof. They only showed a video supposedly portraying Sinwar, even though we haven't seen his face. We don't know when it was recorded. Is it real? Is it fabricated? They have rich history in fabrications and lies, but they did not capture him. And obviously, you have people talking like Israel was saying you have two options, either surrender or die. This is what they told Hamas. However, they're toning it down now. So recently, Yediot Ahronot published an article, which is one of the main newspapers in Israel, saying this is why Sinwar won't submit. He won't hand himself in, as if they just discovered Mars or something. Well, obviously the guy is not gonna hand himself in. Do you think these people are afraid to die, or that they're after worldly luxuries? They had the option to, right? But they constantly show Israel that we're not just after Gaza. We want liberation for our people. We want our historical rights. So no, they haven't caught him, and I don't think they will get to him personally. ZIB 6606, hey Mahmoud, is Hamas going to Russia? Please, what are your thoughts? Yeah, and I spoke about it in the other video that I published earlier on tonight that you can watch after this live stream, but I'll tell you briefly. Obviously, Russia had constant communication with Hamas throughout the years. They didn't just speak with the PLO, unlike many other countries. They don't obviously prescribe Hamas as a terrorist organization. And they had constant meetings. As a matter of fact, they invited the head of Hamas a couple of times previously to Moscow, official state visits with Putin. So, and they had a meeting, they had a delegation led by Musa Abu Marzouk, I think it was, who was the deputy leader of the Hamas political bureau earlier on, after this genocide began. And now they are trying to do something combined with all of the Palestinian movements, the PLO, PIJ and Hamas, because the PIJ and Hamas are not in the PLO. PLO is supposed to be the umbrella of political organizations representing Palestine. However, they never included Hamas in the PIJ because Hamas and the PIJ have red lines when it comes to the resistance, like the armed resistance, whereas the PLO, they only talk about like resistance, like, do you know what I mean? Popular resistance or non-violent resistance. Also, you have the recognition of Israel and all of these things, and they're very, very far away. So I'm not sure how successful, to be fair, that meeting is, but perhaps Russia is trying to have more of an input and show presence when it comes to this, because they're obviously secluded by Western powers when it comes to everything to do with Palestine. They obviously try and seclude them from the international arena anyway, right? As if they control it when they're a minority. But that's, you know, the typical arrogance from the US and its allies. I mean, how ironic is it now Joe Biden is has declared over a new 500 sanctions against Russia. 500 sanctions against Russia, but he's supporting Israel. Imagine how absurd it is. And I spoke about previously, and I'm sorry if I'm deviating a little bit, but I think these things are important. Like when it comes to Russia and the stance that the US and the EU took against them when they're the biggest gas supplier. They weren't considering the economic hit on their own people. We're all paying the price for the US and EU hostility against Russia when it comes to your gas bills, electricity bills, everything to do with that. And they went and even bombed the Nord Stream, the US, and tried to cover it up, but everyone knows it by now. So it's absurd, really. Yet with this small, rogue, failed state, a criminal, genocidal state, Israel, they'll support it to the T, despite the fact that they're committing atrocities and mass murders way more than what Russia did in Ukraine. And obviously not to justify what Russia's doing or anything, you know, we stand with the people at the end of the day, and we try and remain morally consistent. Unlike others who show blatant hypocrisy. We're living in a festival of hypocrisy when it comes to this genocide in Gaza. People are not daring, some of them obviously in power, to speak up against Israel, you know, talking about what's the definition of genocide. Imagine that. So that it is in short about the meeting, and you can obviously watch the video that I posted earlier on with a bit more detail in and background. I have a question. There's a name, I think, in Russian. I'm sorry if I'm unable to read it. Oh, Tripolina. Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Mahmoud. Question: what does a military closed zone mean and implicate? What does it happen when a town is declared a military closed zone? Well, usually, and it would vary from country to country, but usually when we talk about a military closed zone, that means the military operates and controls everything that's going on there. They will have restriction of movement. They will dictate whatever they want. It's similar to when a country goes into a state of war, like many laws are paused when a country is in a state of war. It's a state where a country can declare very severe measures that are completely abnormal, restrict movement, restrict many things when it comes to this. That's in short. And Joseph, thank you for your new membership. Giovanni Di Capo is saying, PLO, why are they there? They should be called the POC, Party of Collaborators. I mean, to an extent, I agree with that, to be fair. And but I'm not talking it with like political affiliation, if that makes sense. But I think when it comes to organizations representing the Palestinians, particularly in the West Bank and Gaza, the thing you need to have in your mind, your first priority, is the interests and needs of the Palestinian people, not of the Israeli occupation. The PLO, in the last 30 years, ever since the Oslo Accords, they've proven time after time that their main interest is Israel's security, you know, following Israel order. And look, they know, they admitted, many of them, they don't move unless authorized by Israel. The Israeli Shabak approves their going and coming back, and if they want, they can prevent people from going back. Israel controls everything when it comes to this. Judith, thank you for your membership, Judith. How are the Palestinians in Gaza going to survive much longer? No food, no aid, disease, rain, and cold. We don't really know, to be honest with you, how long are they gonna, and some of them are not surviving. This is what people need to understand. Some of them are already not surviving. So if you talk about starvation, daily, on a daily basis, we are hearing about people starving to death, especially the most vulnerable: children, very young children, frail elderly, especially in North Gaza. And Israel attacks and bombs and kills people, running in their thousands to try and get uh, fortified flour. That's the food, that's the aid. Not even tinned or canned food like you're having in South Gaza, for example. So people are not surviving, they're already dying. We're already there. It's just about the level of it, and we obviously pray that it doesn't reach much longer level. But Israel is using every war crime possible to make these people submit. Starvation as a tool of war, genocide as a tool of war, cutting any lifeline, hospitals, wheat factories, water, electricity, all of these things are war crimes, declared war crimes. That if they happened in any other country that the US and the EU do not like, that country would have ended. It would have ceased to exist. They would have told you it's a regime, it's not a country, right? They would have portrayed it like they portray North Korea. So that's unfortunately the situation. Joseph Roy is asking, any idea who the U.S. representative meeting in Cairo is today or tomorrow? I'm not entirely sure, but the main negotiating process is going on in three main locations: Cairo, Doha, and Paris. They're going between all of these locations to try and reach a deal. However, Israel is still stubborn when it comes to the conditions. They still won't back down, especially when it comes to withdrawing from Gaza and allowing aid. And obviously, Hamas, to them, there are red lines that they simply won't cross. They have a minimum of requirements when it comes to this, primarily focused on the civilians, on the Palestinian people. And there isn't much positive progress when it comes to this. Blue Herring, why do you think Turkey is not taking any action? They're taking actions, but not military action. Obviously, the most visible actions is military action, military intervention, something like what Hezbollah is doing, or the Yemenis, or the Iraqi resistance. And clearly, they've paused for a while now. The Iraqi resistance, clearly, there's been some sort of an agreement going on in the background. But Turkey, they are supporting in terms of like aid, politically, diplomatically, trying to reach an end to this. However, if you're referring to military intervention, I constantly repeat that these countries like Egypt, Turkey, and other countries too, they won't intervene militarily unless, in my opinion, their national sovereignty, their national territory is under threat or under attack, because there are, to them, and obviously I'm not giving them excuses, I'm just elaborating here, and it's important to emphasize, it's not to show that what they're doing is right or wrong, but I'm just highlighting as to why, because many people want to know why. Because of the implications that they might have, the political, military, and judicial implications as a state in war. Aminata Samaki, what will happen to the UNRWA? It's almost to the end of February. Well, Netanyahu declared that he wants UNRWA to be eliminated. Western powers are playing ball with him, many of them. They obviously stopped funding them because he knows it's the lifeline for Palestinian refugees, and he wants to cut off that lifeline. So previously, when you spoke about aid going into Gaza, that aid would have been handed directly in many cases to the UNRWA, because they were established as a response to the Israeli occupation of Palestine in the late 40s to deal with the refugees that Israel expelled and refuses to bring back. They are in charge of the refugees in Gaza, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. And they rely, as in the Palestinian refugees rely on their aid. They do education, food, all of these things, healthcare. So Netanyahu wants to completely eliminate that. Some countries have increased their support for the UNRWA, but will that be enough? We're not entirely sure. But he wants to dismantle it as an organization. That's why they had this demonization campaign. Even when it comes to the reports, by the way, that spoke about UNRWA members participating in the 7th of October attacks, which led to some of these countries cutting the aid off them. The problem here is this is a politically coordinated move. It's not a security oriented move. Number one, it's absurd for any organization to be punished as a whole if some of its members do something wrong, right? But again, you're not talking about generally the right of the people to resist or defend themselves, because you only hear about Israel's right to defend itself. That's number one, but that's another argument that we can go into. Secondly, the politically motivated move, it's because this leak of these people participating in the 7th of October attacks, this was a confidential conversation between some of the IDF commanders in Gaza and an Israeli representative in the Foreign Office that deals with the UNRWA. This representative in the Foreign Office, obviously aligned with Netanyahu and by Netanyahu's orders, went and leaked this information without consent, which shouldn't be done when you talk about confidential information. But that's the level of distrust between people, how much they backstab each other in Israel. He went and told the person in charge of the UNRWA when they had a meeting in Israel. That person in charge went back to New York. He told the UN and he told the US, this guy did this to me. They automatically cut the funding without submitting evidence, by the way. There haven't been any evidence submitted yet. Clearly, you have an organized, coordinated move, because if you want to follow everything by the rules, by the book, you need to, suspend. You said you suspended them because there's suspicion, immediate suspension. Perfectly understandable. Similarly to how you would suspend someone from a company if they're doing something wrong. Automatic suspension, pending investigation. Well, investigation, no evidence submitted, nothing of the sort. All of a sudden they cut everything. Why? To starve the people of Gaza. That's why, to starve them and put more pressure on them and put more pressure on the people in the hope that Hamas will submit. So we're not sure how long they're gonna survive, but they're still functioning. And Israel has a very rich history of attacking UN bases, whether it's in Lebanon, if you read up about it, and in Gaza, they hundreds of places they attack, killing staff, and again, no outrage about it, really. AB Seed is saying something very, very, very true. People are saying, why is it so, and not taking any action? Have you thought to ask yourself what action are any if you are taking, and what could you do more? I think that is the the correct approach each person should take individually. Don't forget, some people are still afraid of talking even. So the mere act of talking, of breaking the barrier of fear and silence, is an act, because they've obviously planted this fear in you by labeling one side as a demon or a terrorist or whatever it is, and this one other side as if they're a sacred cow or whatever it is, to instill fear. And there's so much to do. There's this participation, there's awareness, liking, sharing, posting. All of these things are so important, and do not undermine them. And again, don't expect everything to happen tomorrow. We typically want results, immediate results. Who wouldn't want immediate results, right? But it's a process, and when you talk about a process that involves the fate of many people against countries that have evil rooted inside them with power, it's not an easy process. But any action is good, and if people could have this attitude that you have, in this ownership, we would be in a better place. And look, it's effective. It's effective. uh, I've never seen in my life this level of awareness. I have never seen it in my life, in my entire life. And it was depressing to many people. To be fair, obviously that didn't stop us from constantly talking. But why is this happening? It's because you're seeing people, other people talking, other people sharing. Someone who you never knew posting a video, and you're sharing it with people, showing just emotional frustration, for example, or anger, or whatever it is, a human response. Anyone with, moral decency, with integrity, would do something like that. So that's an exceptionally important approach. Grammy B and NCQ, with Russia allied with Iran, do you think meeting came about through Hezbollah, Hamas back channels? Are all four resistance groups showing unity by joining this summit with Russia? This is what I heard from the reports, obviously, that I've read in a couple of networks, that it's going to be PLO, PIJ, Hamas. The other parties could be involved. However, with regards to coordination and unity, you need to understand that they have meetings regularly, that they do not declare to coordinate between them, and this coordination could be at a higher level than just the resistance movements that are directly supporting Gaza. But this could also be extended to other countries that are not really mentioned in the conversation. YQB Frenchie, I have always wondered why there is no cruise ships going to help and take Palestinians out of this stupid war zone. It's because Israel controls the sea, the air, and the land. Control, and what I mean by control is obviously military. They will ban anyone from coming in, like what they did with the flotilla back in 2009, I think. Any attempts and that was an attempt for aid, by the way, to end the siege, just to provide medication and food. It's not like they were coming with missiles for Gaza. But it's part of their ongoing process to make life as miserable as possible for the people. But the people realize it. Like, many people in Gaza are like, why do you have 700,000 people in the northern part of Gaza? Have you asked yourself that question? They have the opportunity to go down south, but they know if they evacuate all of these homes, Israel will not allow them to go back, and you'd be talking about settlements and completely getting rid of them, and then they will go back to the south to continue in trying to expel them. Harriet, where is my kufi? I have 5 kufiyas next to me. I'm just not wearing one today. Carla is saying, thank you for membership, Carla. Seems like they could pull up a cruise ship and get people housing, food, medical instantly. A phone call from Biden could make all of this happen, it seems. Everything, if America decides to stop this, they could stop it. The United States administration is the enabler of this, and in many cases, the enabler is worse than the criminal. And I gave an example previously of a warden with a psychopath locked up. This warden comes in, hands the psychopath the keys to get out of this room, and hands him keys to a room full of ammunition and tells him, go, do whatever you want in public, in a mall or something. This is a basic example. Who's worse, the psychopath or the warden? This is the case. This is the case with the Biden administration. They're funding them. They're supporting them with weapons. They can stop this genocide, but they're not. So who's controlling who? Is Israel controlling America? Is Israel controlling the United Kingdom? Is Israel controlling all of them? And is it only by ending this regime in Israel will we end the other tyrannies around them? Donna saying, Donna Lawson, Russia has bases in Syria, including fighter planes. Do you think they would use their bases in the attacks on Syria? They can. Yeah, they can use their bases in Syria. They're there for a reason. That's why they control also the port of Tartus. But for them, obviously, to use it, it would need to reach a level of bigger involvement. And the many people spoke against Israel and the ICJ, yet some of them who are still not cut ties with it. It's just the level of hypocrisy. Really, it's the level of hypocrisy when you just talk without any actions, and many countries are doing that. Jihad el-Aidi, will Israel be held accountable for all the damage and destruction caused monetarily? No. They always get away with it. They ask the Arabs to pay for their mess. As a matter of fact, they asked the UAE to pay the West Bank Palestinian employees who were granted permission previously to work in Israel because Israel banned them from working in the West Bank. And then there were reports of the UAE prince telling Netanyahu, go get the money from Zelensky. Jihad, thank you so much for your super. Yentil Cox. Your opinion is the Houthis expanding the army of soldiers? Thanks, brother. They already have soldiers. The only difference that we've seen recently from the Houthis is their increased attacks, and they're becoming more aggressive in their attacks against the genocide coalition led by the US and the UK. And they're saying they're gonna start targeting submarines or using submarine powers, attacking submarines and stuff like that. So they're increasing. In terms of soldiers, they have like, look, all of the Yemeni people support them. If you look, I'm not sure if some of you look and access the weekly protests in Yemen. You talk about protests, people protesting. Go see their weekly protests for Gaza. It's embedded in the Yemeni people, this support and love for Palestine. 1 million minimum, every single week. And when they started getting attacked, even more people started joining in. It's not like they're missing people, right? You have enough people in Yemen to fight. It's not like they need more people. If they need to expand, they'll get some from the more people from Yemen. Thank you, Molly, very much. Russia giving weapons, that's from blank stares. Training to Hamas on Russian weapons, maybe. Even if they are, I don't see how it would get to Gaza unless there's some sort of a lifeline that Egypt potentially would be involved in because of obviously Russia's location. But look, we've had weapons from North Korea reaching Gaza, from China reaching Gaza. Um, so I wouldn't really be surprised. But this particular summit, I think it's more of an attempt from Russia to unify the Palestinian political movements. But, and I'm not trying to be pessimistic here, but we've seen this scenario so many times from countries with, even more influence on both sides, in Saudi Arabia, in Qatar, in Algeria, in Egypt, and they did not work. Plemic, thank you so much. Thank you, Mahmoud. You're saying, I'm here in Australia. We had a genocide here too, recently reverted to Islam. So grateful. MashaAllah. I mean, look, where did you not have genocide? With the previous and current colonial and imperial powers. All across, look at the history. That's why, like, when this genocide began, and I hardly had any following, right? Hardly anyone was listening to me. I had about 450 subscribers. But I posted a couple of things when I said that look at the countries that sympathize with Israel. Countries with a vast history, with a rich history of colonization, vast history of mass genocide, enslavement. These are the countries sympathizing with Israel and supporting it because they share the same values. Let's go to the next question or comment. Ben Vader is asking, it's a big problem. No major regional powers are taking a stronger stand against Israel. Maybe something is in the works. Yeah, I mean, the main problem is the regional powers' lack of action, really, which enabled this genocide to happen and gave Israel the courage to commit to this genocide. And if that's the thing here, if some cards were used, I mean, you can call that action, right? But I mean, when you talk about action at this level, it would be an action to stop the genocide. That is the priority, to stop the killing of innocent civilians. But haven't even used, basic cards to try and stop it. something is in the works. Could be, look, there's obviously lots of activity. There's lots of diplomatic activity. There's always talks ever since this genocide began. Um, but clearly it hasn't reached a level where it would stop it. And what we need is to stop it, really. If nothing has been working for the past 4.5 months and 30,000 people have been massacred by this genocidal, satanic death cult, then what are you waiting for? Like I always say, the first drop of blood, where are you? Look at the early days. 500, 600, 700, 1,000, over 1,000 a day. Sometimes Al-Ma'madan hospital with people getting treatment and refugees seeking shelter, churches housing refugees, and very old churches, by the way, very old buildings. They want to destroy the history. They want to destroy the people. This is exactly what they've done in 1948, destroying 500 villages, erasing the history as if no one lived here, to promote their pseudo narrative of we came to a land without people and we were people without a land. This is the same campaign on steroids that they're conducting in Gaza. And if any of you obviously have any more questions, please drop them below. Tommy Harris, peace. Why are we not talking about the nukes that are making the Zionists bold? We do. Obviously, Israel has nukes. Like there's sufficient evidence to suggest that they do have nuclear weapon. But I don't think that that's, if you ask me, that's only what's making them bold. What's making them bold is the complicity of global powers, primarily the United States. Complicity, encouragement, and support by the United States, by Britain, that caused this problem in 1917 with their Balfour Declaration, and by the impunity that they have, and they have had for so long. Otherwise, how can this persist? Like many people are talking about now, a solution, a unilateral recognition of Palestinians. Where were you before the 7th of October? These countries that are just talking now, by the way, and still supporting Israel, and just are worried about Israel. They're not worried about the Palestinian people, by the way. So when there's any slight criticism, it's Israel's image that they're worried about, not the Palestinians. They couldn't care less about the Palestinian people. But it is spoken about. I think not enough. Obviously, like look at, for example, if you compare that to Iran, that had a nuclear project, right? I'm not saying that they never said that they want a nuclear bomb, right? They said that we don't believe in nuclear bombs and nuclear, but they always bang on about them. Yet this country that threatened to use nuclear weapons against innocent civilians, it's as if it didn't happen. As a matter of fact, it's as if this genocide is not happening. If you go on mainstream media, it's as if nothing is happening. It's as if nothing is happening, let alone them talking about Israel's nuclear program. That an Israeli revealed, by the way, Vanunu. And I think the Mossad kidnapped him here from London. Dome Gold, you have freedom of speech as long as you don't say too much, from an old song, Running Water, from just before Iraq in 90. Yeah, they're constantly after everyone with freedom of speech when it bothers them. Okay, let's go to the following questions. Patricia Gail McClary, can you describe a little bit about how your friendships with Israeli Jews started and how they felt? Well, look, I'm obviously a Palestinian. I was born in Haifa, which is modern day Israel. So you're surrounded, obviously, with people who are Jewish Israelis or Palestinian Christians, Palestinian Muslims, atheists, and stuff like that. In terms of day-to-day life, like the city that I was born in is a mixed city. It's called a mixed city because there's Jews, there are Arabs there. Um, Friendships, you obviously have lots of people you interact with. Like I didn't have like Israeli Jewish friends that I had a constant ongoing relationship with. Some of a few we did have. Um, but day-to-day interaction, you deal with people. Like I even knew people who were then went to the army, right? Some of them were killed. But the Palestinians inside of Israel, they're a core factor, obviously, in Israel. Many industries, for example, they provide the biggest workforce, for example. We talk about healthcare, other stuff. So, in terms of day to day, normal, because, people speak to me about like my proposal for a one state, and they will ask, how can these two people live with each other based on what you see? Because what you usually see is the conflict filled areas, things that are, brought to the news highlights, right? But not many people show where Jews and Arabs mingle, they live together, they speak with each other, right? Which has been the case before Israel existed. Before Israel existed, there were Jewish people in Israel, right? In Palestine, right? Historically. So it's pretty normal on a day-to-day basis. It's very possible. You have very many decent people. Um, and it feels normal. There's obviously, I need to understand something. When you're a Palestinian born in your land that later had this transformation, obviously, because let me give you an example. The city I was born in, Haifa, my great grandfathers were a few of approximately 5,000 who remained in the land after the ethnic cleansing campaign. So, Haifa as a city had a population of approximately 75, 80,000 Palestinians, Muslims, and Christians. When the Zionists took over, they expelled 90% of them. Very few families left in Arab majority areas. So obviously you have all of this history dragging. There's always a sense of awkwardness, right? There's a vibe of awkwardness. There's a vibe of you're a class B citizen because you have the nation state law. You obviously have more rights than the Palestinians, the West Bank and Gaza. But you obviously have all of this awkward vibe where many people, it's as if you feel you're a stranger in your own land, right? Especially when you go to places that were like ethnically cleansed, you'll see houses from 1948 and 1930 and 1920, and you know that a family lived there and they can't come back. And sometimes you know the family, by the way, they'll be in Lebanon, they'll be in Syria. So there's this awkward vibe in general. There's this ongoing tension. And if you go to multiple other parts where it's more, for example, it's not really mixed, you have a Jewish majority areas, or, if you go to settlements, Jerusalem is one of the worst places in terms of this awkward vibe going on. It's a very tense area because it's specifically in East Jerusalem, that people who talk about the two-state solution is supposed to be the Palestinian capital, where Israel constantly expands and is on a campaign to what they call Judaize it, make it Jewish, by obviously trying to force people out of their properties, or buy them, or bully them, or harass them. So yeah, in the day to day, you'll deal with many like Israeli people. It's normal. You'll have Israeli neighbors and stuff. When it comes to conflicts, obviously it's awkward because you know the side you're supporting, and you have someone else supporting the other side, right? But obviously, that's why I promote like a one-state solution with equality. That's the main problem. It's not about people not being able to live with each other. That's not the case, because as human beings, you have almost the same requirements when you talk about day-to-day life, right? Employment, education, you want to worry about your family, and what have you. But when you have a country that's been built upon supremacy, built upon racism, occupation, and oppression, it makes things obviously awkward and abnormal. And it's only people who have lived in such circumstances, although they're quite rare. Like you might have an example in South Africa, although people need to understand it's not like exactly South Africa. You can say there's an apartheid, obviously, but the level that it is in Israel is a very, very extreme. So people can live, but obviously you need to dismantle the apartheid system and the regime of supremacy. Um, Liba the Great also destroying Bronze Age remains of ancient Philistine city of Gaza. That's a very interesting comment, because historically, the historical reference to Philistine, like over 2,000 years ago, not the more contemporary definition of Palestine, which was under control of the Ottoman Empire, later the British Mandate. It was that area. Gaza was a substantial area. It was the original kind of area of Palestine that extended from the coasts of Gaza, Sdud, and Asqalan, all the way to parts of the West Bank, that southern part. And at one point in history, you had Israeli kingdoms, right, up north, and Philistine as an area. However, as time went by, the whole area started being referred to as Philistine. But yeah, they are destroying as much evidence as possible, really, because they want to erase, again, the history. And also think about it this way: why are they destroying universities in Gaza? What's the purpose of that, of destroying a university, when you have no evidence whatsoever that any action has been taken from that place? I mean, even if you did, there's an argument there. But they want to destroy every single lifeline, for the people, any history, everything. They destroyed masjids, mosques that are hundreds of years old. And that church, it was the oldest, one of the oldest in Palestine, by the way, that they destroyed with people in it. Debbie, thank you. Can the UN or another agency declare Palestine a free state for their freedom and allow other countries to go into Palestine and provide aid? Is it magical thinking? No, it's logical thinking, really. That's the logical thinking. It just gets obviously distorted and crushed almost when it comes to the reality on the ground. Like many countries recognize Palestine as a state, but in terms of what they can do, they're faced by the occupation. They're faced by Israel. So there's a limit to obviously what they can do, what they can let in, and all of these things. And Israel, we've been saying this for a very long time. They don't want the Palestinians to have a state because to them it would be a terror state. Everything is terror, right? And they've been saying this now, and even the opposition. This is how hopeless it is in terms of Israeli politicians, right? Because if you had someone who had some sort of reason, right, reasoning or reasonableness, and who was genuinely peace seeking, and things, you can compromise on certain things to achieve an ultimate peace, or that doesn't exist in Israeli politics now. Left, right, everything. We don't want a Palestinian state. They can't have a state, which just highlights how important it is to just dismantle this regime of supremacy altogether. Altogether. Al-Maliki channel Quran Hadith History is saying, why can't people in Arab countries demand their leaders to take action? It's because obviously many of the Arab countries are authoritarian. That's number one. Many of them have dealings with Israel, whether directly or indirectly, and it's not like the Arab people live in open democracies or and have so much freedom to talk. So you'll see people protesting, for example, in some countries, but to an extent. If you look at the protests in Jordan, for example, they were being very limited places. You can't go outside any zone, and you have so much security on the Israeli borders. I mean, if the people were allowed to do as they wish, people would flood Israel without any weapons. Just go to the borders and go in, right? But it's the regimes that suppress that. And if you talk about other Arab countries, right, we don't want to start naming all of them now, you will have the opposite happening. You'll have people pro-Israel blatantly blaming the resistance, saying that they don't have a right to do that. What they're doing is terrorism, right? Selling the Israeli narrative. You'll see some of them saying Israel belongs to the Israelis, yeah? As if you're talking about the whatever it is, fake belief that these people are promised this land or whatever it is, the Zionist colonizers, right? Some countries go to that extent, and if you see their mainstream media, you will know exactly what I'm talking about. So unfortunately, if you didn't, that's the thing. If you had countries that are actually sovereign, representing their people truly around Israel, that wouldn't be the case because they're not representing. None of the governments surrounding Israel and many other Arab countries represent the will of the people. Because what's the will of the people, really? They want to see this injustice end. And they haven't even taken measures to stop a genocide and starvation. They're spending billions on luxuries and stuff, and people are dying of hunger. And when it's within their power to stop it. Sister from Manila, hi Muhammad. Every time I watch you, I start craving Yemeni and Iranian cuisine with Russian desserts. One day I hope this meals becomes a reality. Make it reality. Futate is saying, I heard that there was a rabbi who prophesied that Netanyahu would be the last prime minister of Israel and he would welcome the Messiah. Do you think this affects the way he conducts himself, especially in war? Um, I heard that too, and it's quite surprising because the guy's an atheist, like the people who founded Israel and Zionism, atheists who have nothing to do with Judaism. Is it affecting the way he conducts himself in war? That's from Futate, the answer, the question. He has always been a narcissistic psychopath. If you look at his record, Benjamin and Netanyahu, the guy, he led Israel to 5 elections in 4 years. An extra 2 happened just within 3 years before that. Just because of his stubbornness to remain in his party leadership, despite corruption charges, and despite many in the opposition saying, we will even make a national unity government just without you individually. Now, any decent person, if you go into politics, like, you'd think, why would people want to go and become a prime minister or president? To serve the people. You're there to serve. You're not there for yourself. You sacrifice. It's all about sacrifice and serving the people. But despite all of that, he led to elections after elections after elections and started having more ministries to give more to people who will make a coalition with him, unnecessary ministries, ministers without specific speciality. For example, in Israel, millions spent on these things, if not hundreds of millions or billions even, just for his own sake. And his psychopathy is highlighted in this war. But I'll tell you this genocide, what's making this genocide is Israel. Is not just Netanyahu, it's Israel as a state. This is how it was founded. It was founded on genocide. It was founded on mass expulsion. And people who don't share the views of Benjamin Netanyahu committed atrocities that were similar to this previously. So it's the system that's implemented the regime and the ideology behind it, how it's founded, this violent, racist ideology that somehow people here in the West are allowed to say that they adhere to and follow. People openly declare that they're Zionists. What's the difference between when you openly declaring that you're a Zionist and you openly declaring that you're a member of ISIS? What's the difference? Declaring that you're a Zionist supporting what Israel is doing is worse. And what they're trying to do now is link Zionism to Judaism, this malicious attempt. Again, to stop criticism for Israel. Imagine that. Taylor Samhur is saying, my Baba used to tell me when I was a kid that our family owned an orange produce market in Jaffa before the Nakba. That's a very interesting story because Jaffa is known to have some of the best oranges in Palestine. Unfortunately, it witnessed one of the biggest mass expulsions in 1948. I think particularly Haifa and Led, Ramli, Jaffa areas had the biggest mass expulsions, and they had very advanced civilized societies over there that were thriving really, and rich in history and culture and all of these things. Yet Israel acted like, they didn't exist. And inshallah, all of the refugees will be allowed to return soon. IG to me, do I speak fluent Hebrew? Yes. I speak fluent Hebrew. We learn Hebrew from a very young age. So Hebrew, Arabic, and English. So I'm bringing you the sources from the Hebrew, from the Arabic, and from the English too. And thank you for everyone contributing. I apologize if I'm unable to address all of the comments just because of the time limit. Van Moore is saying, I heard there were around 3,000 Jews in Palestine before Israel. Is that correct? I'm not entirely sure of the number, but I think it's bigger than 3,000 because, okay, so let's put it this way. Zionism was established in the late 19th century. Before establishing Israel, they started conducting waves of what they call aliyah in Hebrew. Aliyah, which is moving to the country, immigrating, migrating to the promised land, the Zionist movement. So if you want to calculate it based on the Jews before this Zionist move to bring more Jewish people who weren't born in Palestine and are not natives to Palestine, the number would be much, much smaller. So if you're talking about 3,000, could be in the tens of thousands before that. And to be fair, I'm not entirely sure of the exact number. However, the number started to rise after these aliyah moves, what they call, to prepare for the establishment of Israel as a nation state for the Jewish people. And that's why they expelled Palestinians in 1948, because despite all of these moves to bring so many Jewish people from all across the world and sell this lie that this is the only state for Jews, and obviously capitalizing on the trauma of World War II, they weren't a majority. So they had to expel people. So they became a majority through genocide and mass expulsion. This is how they became a majority. But even then, that wasn't enough. It wasn't enough with the Jews of Europe, because initially they only brought Jews from Europe. Okay? They wanted the European colonizers to come. Wasn't enough. What did they start doing then? They started bringing the Jews from the Arab states. And in many cases, they conducted terrorist activities in these states to scare the Jewish people from communities and lands that they lived in historically in peace with their Muslim neighbors for hundreds, if not thousands of years, and tell them, oh no, look, you're not safe here, you need to come here. Why? Because they need a Jewish majority in Israel. And when they started bringing them to Israel from Yemen, from Iraq, from all of these countries, they started telling them, you're not Arab. So if you talk about indoctrination, right? They started indoctrinating. So they changed their names, like they changed the European names to something more Hebrew, this new Hebrew language they created, modern Hebrew. And they started giving them Hebrew names, and they started telling them, you're not Arab, you're Jewish. In obviously completing the attempt of ethnicizing Judaism, making Judaism an ethnicity, not a religion, which is again a very dangerous thing. It's like saying Christians are a race, not a religion, right? Although Judaism is a religion. That's why you have many people like Orthodox religious Jews, many of them will oppose this idea very heavily that Jews are a race. They're not a race, they're a religion. But this is what Zionism wanted to do. Also, to link the race with the land, and then if you're attacking the state of Israel, you're attacking the Jewish people. And that's why they came up with the term anti-Semitism, by the way. Semitism in relation to being Semitic, despite the fact that they have no link with Semitism whatsoever. And then based on that, if you're criticizing them, you're anti-Semitic, and therefore you are against the Jewish people. So I hope that elaborates. Donna is asking me, thanks for the live stream, you're welcome. My book is available on my website for free, mahmoudod.com. You can find the links in the channel, by the way, in the channel description. You get it for free. If you're on a mobile, you can read it, browse it through the mobile. If you want to download it in a PDF version, go through a desktop, download it, and then you can read. I don't have a printed copy yet or a Kindle, but if I do, I will obviously share that with you. Ashkiro Muksi, Mahmoud, what type of jobs do Palestinians in Israel do in healthcare, and would Israel stop functioning if 2 million Israeli Arabs were pushed out? So they work in all industries, most industries, right? There are industries that they are the majority in. There are industries that they're discriminated against to work in. And obviously there's priority for Jewish people, or you'll have industries that will tell you we're looking for for people, not to sound racist, but as in, you know what I mean, they'll tell you we want people post army service, because it's conscription on Jewish people. So they won't say we only want Jews. They'll tell you you can work if you served in the army. But in terms of industries, many industries, not just healthcare. Healthcare, they have a big chunk, obviously. And in wars, for example, you'll see lots of unity in this sector, particularly because people work together in harmony. They save lives regardless of the background of the people and all of these things, despite the fact that this government tried to even introduce more racism into the healthcare sector, to a level where it reached where some people would say, I don't want to be treated by an Arab in Israel. I'm talking about people in government level, awful stuff. But obviously, you have professors, you have people in academia, all sorts, really. Will Israel stop functioning? Interesting. Yeah, it can stop functioning, of course. They know how much they need the Arab and Palestinians. Like, you, for example, you're describing them Israeli Arabs, right? Some people in Israel, they would accept this description. Many would refuse it. Like I myself, I'll tell you, I'm a Palestinian, but I'm also an Israeli national, right? Because I was born in Israel as a country, but I'm Palestinian. This is my roots. What do you mean Arab? Because it follows the narrative of we have no ethnicity to eliminate the history. They do, of course, but even that, it's not enough. That's why they get laborers from the West Bank in construction, for example, and all of these things. And I have an argument in my book that, like, Israel constantly talks about the demographic threat. So that's why they wouldn't take Palestinian refugees, because they're a demographic threat. You'll have the Palestinians coming back, and if there's democracy, they'll come to power and they'll tell you, no, it's Palestine, and the flag will change, and all of these things. The counter argument to that is, obviously, put aside this nationality thing and racism, because I couldn't care less, really, personally, about nationality. You know, it's not like you pride yourself for your nationality. We speak about Palestine mainly because of the injustice that's been going there. Really, I don't care where it is, who you're from, whatever it is. And if the opposite was happening, I'd be with the oppressed people, regardless of who they are. But they constantly talk about the demographic threat for the Jewish state. And the argument that I speak about in my book is, why don't you call it a demographic blessing? Like, firstly, the place can have way more than 7, 8, 9, 10 million. There's massive space for tens of millions, right, in historical Palestine. Secondly, you need people. Countries were built on immigration, right? People need immigration. And when you talk about Israel and Palestine, it's a historical right regardless. Do you know what I mean? And a country with people from all across the world, and obviously mainly the Palestinians who were expelled from 1948, can be an amazing country, thriving in many, many cases. It's just that this extremist, racist, violent ideology prevents this from happening. And in many parts of the world, this racist and supremacist rhetoric is used just to kind of divide people, really. And that's why you'll see it a lot from people in power, because they want to divide people. They don't want to open people's eyes to other cultures and, this mutual understanding and respect and acceptance despite disagreements. They won't talk about these things, and they use situations like this, even though it's very difficult to keep your composure, right, when it comes to Palestine. But it's important to keep your composure and not lose sight of what's right. Inner Sanctum is saying, I worked in the security at the Baha'i Center in Haifa. I was taken to Nablus, and on that day I saw IDF thugs breaking 10-year-old boys' arms. That was in 1986. That's the norm. That's the norm in the West Bank. And now they're shooting. 406 were killed, excuse me, since the 6th of October. Since the 7th of October. 105 of them are children. Imagine. They're killed, they're shooting them, field executions against anyone who walks sometimes. And many Israeli soldiers, including one who's called Iran Efrati, had an interview on YouTube. He revealed what happened with him during his service in Hebron particularly. They will talk about this. There are organizations in Israel. One of them is called Shuvrim Shtika in Hebrew, or breaking the silence. They will tell you what they were forced to do in the West Bank. You have like these organizations of some Israelis who are in the army who actually speak up, who are brave enough to speak up against the army and the apartheid system in the West Bank. And obviously many vocal critics of Israel are Israelis who served in the army. Some of the people you will see online. So these are people who were in the army in elite units in Israel. But then they realized, like, hold on a second, when they started meeting Palestinians, seeing them, and actually realizing the reality and the fact that they're soldiers in an apartheid supremacist regime, they completely switch sides. Joe Reed, Mahmoud, you're an education brother. One state profound. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think it is the solution. Mixed chick, do they commit violence in the Arabic community in Haifa? Not much. No, in mixed cities it's usually normal. Obviously, if you have, for example, protesting or stuff like that, you can see violence there. In 2021, when there was an escalation, there were mobs of settlers in certain situations protected by police raiding mixed cities, because to them that's a target. No, we don't want to see Arabs anywhere. Luckily, things didn't go completely out of control back then. But in terms of day-to-day life, there's definitely normality in some cases. Now the situation isn't good, from what I hear, like the day-to-day stuff. There's very much more racism and much more kind of segregation. Things are changing. Um, and obviously it's supported by this rhetoric that's being spread and by the country being in a state of war. And technically, when you're in a state of war, you start doing whatever the hell you want to do, banning people from protesting, from liking, sharing, doing anything, really, and promoting this venomous rhetoric. You have people on live television promoting killing babies and starving them to death. So who's listening? Who's listening? All of the population is listening. It's it's a it's a mass brainwashing campaign, really, on steroids again. Like there's indoctrination, and that's why there's segregation when it comes to schools. See, Jewish majority schools, Arab schools, right? Because they want to keep it segregated, because it's important for them to continue pushing this indoctrination of pseudo narrative when it comes to the history, how it began. It's our land. We were promised by God. There wasn't anyone here. I guess some people are totally ignorant about the ethnic cleansing and the atrocities in 1948. Completely ignorant about anything that happened, the destruction, everything. Liba the Great, as a Jew, I can't imagine living there and being able to look my Arab neighbors in the eye. I can't imagine the kind of cognitive dissonance that requires. Look, I get that. I get that. It's a toxic place to be in, really. And you kind of realize that when you go out. You realize it when you go out of the country. Like when I went out of Israel, you, you automatically have a sense of, hold on a second, a bit of relief, right? From this toxicity. But when you're in a situation, I mean, as human beings, we adapt. So the situation becomes normal. Awkwardness becomes the norm. Because you want to adapt, you want to survive, you were born here, you have your daily stuff, all of these things, right? And there's constant propaganda being pushed to normalize the abnormal, normalize the atrocity, normalize the injustice by constantly feeding this racist rhetoric. And look, some people are waking up to it, but not to a level where there can be an all-out change. Saying that, many things, many things are not reported in Israel. What's happening, the vibe between people, many people saying in the society, this is ended, that's it, we're done. The idea of this Zionism has failed. I even quoted like some analysts and writers from Haaretz a couple of months ago. Do you know what I mean? Many of them will tell you the idea of Zionism is end. That's it. We failed. We need to look for something else if we want to stay here. But that's obviously not something mentioned on the political level. On the political level, it's the worst it has ever been. It's like a do or die situation to save this racist supremacist state. Ash is asking if I was ever in Palestine, Israel, when the Arab countries had wars with Israel. The was obviously there for throughout like conflicts in the late 90s, 2000s. You had the uprising, the Intifada, all of these things. In terms of the 73 or stuff, no, I wasn't born then. I was born in 88. Um, but the most significant war witnessed was the 2006 war with Lebanon. Why? Because it was under attack from Hezbollah. So many missiles landed in Haifa. And there was no Iron Dome back then. Everything landed. Um, and it was a very intense war. I mean, I can't imagine, how it is in the South now, right? But the older wars, like if you hear from the older generations, the worst war was 1973 in terms of vibe, because obviously Egypt humiliated Israel on the 6th of October 1973. But many people in Israel say that this is the worst situation the country has ever been in history. It's worse than 1973 when it comes to casualty situation, a lack of security, people completely disregarding the whole idea. But that's why I have so many people leaving, because they no longer believe in the idea. You're supposed to be a safe haven. You're selling yourself as a safe haven for Jewish people, right? And you're the worst place for Jewish people to live in. Another interesting question from Dudush Sadiqi. Hi Mahmoud, what do you think about the Haridim? Haridim are like a specific religious movement in Orthodox Judaism. News that there will be drafted to army if conscription law isn't passed by April. Can you explain the Haridim status and also this new law? Yeah, for you to understand that, I'll give you a bit of a background. So in Israel, the conscription is on known kind of religious Jews. The Haridim and the Orthodox community traditionally were exempt from conscription. Why? Because they dedicate their life to learning the Torah. So they're religious people, and they do not go to the army. But with the years, you started having more and more people refusing to serve in the Israeli army from the population. Many of them for moral reasons, right? But if they would say it's a moral reason and I refuse to serve in the army, you're sentenced to prison. So many of them would tell you, I am like, I don't believe in violence, right? I'm a pacifist. I have mental illness. I have some sort of women could get away more with it, men less so. But that number started to increase, and you had more people leaving Israel, obviously, going to other countries when they turn 18 to run away from military service. This trend obviously continued. It has expanded heavily, reached higher levels during the judicial reform process, because then you started having people in the military asking people to refuse to serve, because to them the country started to become a dictatorship with all of this judicial reform that Netanyahu and his government were planning. But from over 2 decades ago, the number slowly started to reduce, and then it picked up a pace. Where do we go as a country? We need people. We're a security nation. We're a nation of army. Israel, this is how it was founded. Where do we go? We go to the religious community. Initially, it was faced by so much resistance, but the establishment was very, very keen on implementing it. So you started to have small groups within the Orthodox Jewish community joining, very small groups. And then obviously you had the governments. The governments changed things. Like you have Netanyahu, he was forming coalitions uh, in many cases, if not in all cases, with those Orthodox religious Jews, like Yahadut HaTorah, the Judaism of the Torah, who represent the Orthodox Jewish community. But in return for them joining the coalition, he would tone it down with the conscription, right? And he would also give them things to do with like keeping the Shabbat or whatever, not having transport on Saturdays because it's like a holy day, right? It's the Shabbat and things like that. But now they're at their worst situation. They want to try and make up the numbers in any way possible because you have people serving in the army running away from conscription. Brigades like Givati, they're refusing now to be deployed in central Gaza. You had thousands fleeing the war in the middle of the war in the beginning. And you have divisions in between the divisions of the army, right? And the big brigades like Givati withdrew. That's traditionally the oldest Israeli army brigades, and they introduced the Kfir division that we spoke about when that was done, that consists of radical religious Zionists from the West Bank who don't have a lot of experience even in urban warfare. So all of these things combined, they push for them to try and get the Orthodox religious community to make up the numbers. Ashkiro Moxie, what do you think? DJ Khaled staying quiet and even being seen with a Starbucks cup. Look, he probably knows that everything is on the line if he says a word. Could he be so careless as well as someone who has roots in Palestine? Or is it a threat from the people behind him? Is it a combination of the two? I'm not entirely sure, but let me tell you something. We don't need him. We don't need any you know. We don't need these people to speak up. Someone speaking up who has nothing to do with Palestine and its history, they'll speak, no problem. I'm not looking for a famous person to come and endorse. We're not looking for validation from anyone here. We will speak even if I'll personally speak if I'm the only person on earth speaking. Thankfully, I'm not. You know, there are many people doing a great job. And do you know what? I think these people shouldn't even be spoken about, really. If you don't want to talk, even though you have roots and you're scared and you don't want to sacrifice your career or whatever, or money, or all of these temporary worldly possessions, it's really up to you. Ashkiro Moxie, Rafah border has been bombed multiple times and Egypt just talks. Does Egypt really have a red line? Will they ever confront Israel if they try and take over the Philadelphia corridor? Well, Israel hasn't started. Yeah, they bombed, obviously, but they didn't have a ground invasion. So we still don't know if Egypt will respond or not. We will obviously judge that after, if this action takes place. Is it delayed because of Egypt? Could be. Is the ground invasion of Rafah, is it delayed because of Egypt? Are there less talks because of something Egypt said? Or because of what Egypt did to counter this in Rafah, especially with the walls that they're creating there to potentially deal with an ethnic cleansing attempt, so as to show Israel, you won't be allowed to proceed with this. All of these things could be combined together. Is it enough from Egypt? No, I don't think it's enough. Look, Egypt, I think they should have taken a stronger position, personally, to stop this massacre from the beginning. Similarly, with every country that had power to do so. Really, anyone who had any power to stop this massacre, they should have done so. But with regards to that, we will see if they do go ahead with it. Because look, we're hearing it less and less now. I'm not sure if it's just a strategy from Israel, but it could be due to some things going in the background. Okay, let's see if we have anything else before we wrap up. Sangamara, is there still mosques in Tel Aviv functioning? Yeah. There's a mosque called Hassan Bek, very famous. There are many mosques in Jaffa, um, which is obviously now part of Tel Aviv. It was literally mainly Jaffa when it was Palestine. So yeah, there are still mosques. Ashkiro Moxie, what's the equality of living standards of Palestinians in Israel? Is it equal to Jews? No, less. Because in Palestinian majority areas, you will see less governmental support financially, building permits, hospitals, all of these things. There's discrimination. There's discrimination. Obviously, you have the Hasbara people telling you, no, there's equality. Look, there's Muslims living there. Wow. But yeah, we're living there. Are we living equally with full rights? No, we're not. So there is inequality from the get-go to this day. There has never been equality in Israel. Completely out of the topic question, Yusuf Ali, right? Mahmoud, do you like shawarma or burger? Both. Oh my God, both of them together. Nah, to be fair, you need a day for shawarma and you need a day for burger, right? And then you'll have a veggie day and eat hummus and falafel. Okay. All right. Okay, I'll take this last question. Abir is asking me, what do you think about Nas Daily? Well, I've watched some of his videos. I didn't know he was a Palestinian from Israel, but then I knew that from some of his videos. I think it was a video when he was in Jerusalem or something. I highly disagree with him. Highly disagree with him. And I'm not sure if what he's doing or if this position that he's taking is based on his own convictions. And if it's his convictions, then do you know what? So be it, right? But I don't appreciate when people start distorting facts, specifically when you want to talk about Israel as a state. You know, it's our duty to say it as it is, and not improve the image of something that's rotten from the core, and also not demonize the oppressed side. We can't demonize the Palestinian people and demonize the resistance and delegitimize as if, you know, the Palestinian people are somehow equal to Israel in rights or in power or in stats or whatever. And the moral position is to stand with the oppressed, to stand with what is right. I don't think he's done that. I haven't seen anything to signal that. And apparently after this started, he started saying that he's, if I'm not mistaken, more Israeli and less Palestinian, which I find funny, really. But like, from my perspective, each to their own. Dude, you want to take Israel's side, take Israel's side. And obviously, when you're taking Israel's side and embracing this narrative as it is, you're already distorting facts. You're already embracing lies, because it's a country that was based on lies and manipulation and propaganda and deflection. But I couldn't care less, to be honest with you. Take that position. From my perspective, I'll talk about what I believe in. I'm not looking for validation from anyone. I'm not looking for approval from anyone. I'm sharing what I know from my perspective. I try and be as truthful as possible, whether people like it or not. You know, I don't have someone backing me with like millions or whatever. I'm not sure that could be a part of it. You know, when you have like probably huge financial interest or something, and someone's threatening you, they probably have a hold on you. But I don't think any level of money or possessions or whatever should stop people from speaking the truth and standing for what is right, even if the closest people to you don't like it. And we'll end that there. 2 hours, yes, some of you are saying 2 hours a lot, and thank you. Some of you saying 2 hours too much. Look, for those who like to stay for 2 hours, stay for 2 hours. Those you don't like, stay for 2 hours. Not a problem as well. You can watch snippets from it. I initially target an hour, but then we continue with talks, and you know, there's so many questions that can be spoken about in so much detail. But thank you so much for joining me. Thank you to our moderators. Thank you for anyone sending supers, for your participation as well, and for your questions. I'm gonna be here, obviously night, evening, morning, depending on where you are. Some people from America, Australia, and other parts. I'll be here hopefully every night, 9:30. Apart from the video that I publish, usually when it comes to live streams, I'll tell you about them in advance if I'm not doing one. And I've tried to be consistent the past 2 weeks, but in a case where I'm not going to do one, I will post it on my community tab. Otherwise, expect me every evening at 9:30. Again, thank you so much for participating. And I will hopefully see you soon in the next video. Take care.